Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week, in partnership with the International Herald Tribune, and Becca Murray is with us, Vivian Walt of Time Magazine, Nicholas Norbrook, the Africa Report, and Dave Clark of the French news agency AFP. He's got his passport back, but there's hardly what you might call a sense of closure after prosecutors dropped sex assault charges against Dominique StraussKahn.
It's the end of a terrible ordeal, an unfair ordeal. I am relieved for my wife, for my children, my friends, everyone who supported me by sending letters and emails, amongst other things. They have to know that their support was very important.
And Becca Murray, your thoughts on hearing the man who was the head of the IMF before this all began in mid-May?
Well, I mean, my first thought really has got to be with his wife, who stood by him. It's a new chapter for her. I think about the accuser, too, who has seen her case just crumble like this. I think about the way the case unfolded. And I'm sure a lot of people will be doing a lot of second guessing, including inside Cyrus Vance Jr.'s office, as to what could have been done differently. Manhattan District Attorney, who first brought the charges, insisted that it was a strong enough case that he should be denied bail and placed effectively under very expensive house arrest because the witness was so credible. And then found out through his own devices, through information obtained elsewhere, that she was not credible. And so he had to do what he had to do, which was to make that information known, and that this all ended up in the charges being dropped because he couldn't put on a case with a credible witness. What we don't know, and to your question, is this case closed? Let's leave aside the fact that there are other actions pending against Dominique StraussKahn, civil actions in the United States and in France. What we don't know now is really what happened in that room. There's almost no way to find out without going through a trial of some sort. The fact that these charges were dropped meant that Nafitassou Diallo will not get to tell her story, Dominique Strauss-Kahn will not get to tell his story, and even if they did, we still don't really know what happened. But
there might be a civil suit.
There is going to be a civil suit. But, you know, what I keep coming... out, of course. As many are. Yeah. But what I keep coming back to is what Sylvie Kaufman of Le Monde said in an editorial that was published in the International Herald Tribune, is even if this was not a criminal encounter, even this was not a sex crime, what you're still left with, by everyone's admission, is someone who had a sexual encounter with a maid in a hotel room and then went to meet his daughter for lunch and then got a plane to fly home to his wife. And the final thought I have on that is this somebody who has a political future in France.
And we'll get back to that issue of whether or not he's got a political future in France in a moment. I want to pick up on what you said about the case crumbling, and there will be second guessing, not just of the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, but also of the accuser's lawyers, Nafissatou Diallo's, who are not going to let the story die, as Vivian Walt says, perhaps heading for a settlement, perhaps heading for a civil court case. One of her attorneys was in Paris this week, gathering evidence for that civil suit. Douglas Wigdor spoke to Melissa Bell in the France 24 interview.
If you had posed a question to Ms. Diallo, would you rather Mr. Strauss-Kahn go to jail for 20 years or 15 years and get no money, or would you rather have $10 million and he not go to jail? She would choose him going to jail and getting no money.
Vivian Walt, your thoughts on that?
Well, he's not going to go to jail. I would say, you know, his words of it's the end of a terrible ordeal and it's been so unfair is really, you know, very much beside the point. Dominique Strauss-Kahn is one of the luckier guys on the planet right now. We will not ever hear what happened behind closed doors. This case, I highly doubt, will ever be heard in any kind of a courtroom, and he will settle out of court, and his, you know, it's pocket change to him. So, I think the next questions are, you know, how does this affect other rape cases in New York? You know, will this discourage women from actually trying to...
Let me interrupt you on that point. There's an editorial which you ran earlier this week, Thursday, a lead editorial on that point where you were saying you worried that women may be nervous in the future about coming forth. Do you agree with that?
Well, you know, I actually saw a very different take on this by the woman who began the sex crimes unit in New York, and it became a model for the United States, saying that the prosecutor had made exactly the right kind of decision, the DA did, in withdrawing the charges, because if this case went to trial and he won his trial, it would discourage other women from trying to bring criminal charges against their rapists, and that in fact she was quite happy that it didn't go to trial. So I think there are two ways to look at this. Maybe for the cause of, you know, women who are sexually assaulted, this might not be such a bad thing.
Your thoughts on that, Nicholas Norbrook, about on that? Do you think that it could have been worse had it all gone to trial?
Well, I think again, it's one of these things that we'll never know, but it was interesting to hear Mr. Wigdor there speaking about, how he saw things and how Ms. Diallo saw things in particular. And his colleague, Thibault de Montbial, at a press conference a few days ago, started evoking a vast network of Dominique StraussKahn sympathizers, who helped squash these witnesses from many different walks of life, political activists.
So hang on a sec, because we heard conspiracy theories about how this was a plot to keep him from running for president, and now we're hearing conspiracy theories about there's a whole network of people to help him.
Absolutely, yeah, and not only a conspiracy theory, the lawyers have put a complaint into the parquet just outside of Paris, I believe. And in this complaint, they say that one of the deputies of the mayor of Sarcelles, Mr. Pupini, who is a close ally of Mr. Strauss-Kahn, one of his deputies went and approached one of these potential witnesses that Mrs. Diallo's legal team wanted to put forward, and asked her, how much she would like to stay silent. So they're prepared to get public with this. Absolutely, you have different theories on all sides, and I think it's quite early to start drawing attentions. I think people who on the left in France who congratulated and cheered in what I found quite an obscene manner the return of Dominique Strauss-Kahn, as if there had been a complete travesty of justice, and it was horrific, and I found that a little bit obscene. As you were saying, there was a 7-minute sexual encounter of a fairly sordid nature in a hotel room in New York. That's a fact. How can you trumpet the guy's return as being fantastic?
We're going to hear. The problem with the Socialist Party will have will not be so much the sexual either indiscretion or crime, depending on what happened in that room. I think the biggest problem the Socialist Party is going to have is that the $10 million that was just evoked there as possible compensation is pocket change for Dominique Strauss-Kahn and certainly for his wife.
We know too much about.
We know how much he can afford to pay for bail. We know a lot more about his lifestyle. And for him to be a champion of the French Socialist Party in a time of austerity measures, given the amount of cash he has, the French like to say that they don't worry about people's private lives. But they may not have wanted to ask these questions, but once the answers are put out there in front of them, there's no way they vote for that guy.
Let's talk about the French and their public opinion and their politicians. First of all, bringing up what you just mentioned, his hopes of running for president may be dashed. He's still a major player inside the Socialist Party. Listen as earlier in the day, this Friday, Martine Aubry, the party leader, stood by him.
Justice stated that there was no rape and no force. That's the only thing which matters to me.
Now, that's a stance that many find unacceptable, including in this around this table. In a Wednesday editorial entitled Left Without Honor, the Guardian newspaper wrote, "One Berlusconi is enough. A rehabilitation of Mr. Strauss-Kahn would dishonor the French left." And in a new poll, 80% of the French believe Strauss-Kahn should not run for president. But that doesn't mean they want him to go away.
Left-wing sympathizers don't necessarily have a negative opinion of Dominique Strauss-Kahn or a moral judgment which says he should end his career in politics. Instead, they say to us, no, Dominique Strauss-Kahn shouldn't be here during the campaign, but as a minister after a socialist president's elected, why not?
Vivian Walt, do you honestly see, once the dust has settled, Dominique StraussKahn becoming the finance minister or the prime minister of France?
I hope not. I mean, personally, I sort of feel, what a waste. Here is clearly a brilliant guy, extraordinarily talented as an economist, and with an absolutely fatal weakness. And as much as many French people like to say it has nothing to do with politics, what happens in the bedroom is, irrelevant. Nonetheless, this is an abuse of power, and in some sense of privilege as well. He can afford to get anything he wants, and is used to getting anything he wants. And I think, the distaste of this whole affair really will linger.
And he can afford to get anything he wants because his wife is rich. So not only is he betraying his wife, he can get away with it because of her wealth.
Well, he made enough bucks himself, I believe, right?
It would be pocket change for his wife, but yes.
All right, we're going to look at one final issue, which is the one that's concentrated the minds of markets around the world. Shares in Apple recovering since Wednesday's news that its iconic founder was stepping aside. How iconic? Let's look at the headline in The Economist on Steve Jobs' departure. It says, "The Minister of Magic steps down." The man with the Midas touch, with products that have, revolutionized home computing, the music industry, and the telephone. And what's interesting is we're talking about a businessman, but when he unveils a product or stages a press conference, he's nothing less than a rock star.
Anyone can make music now.
And Steve Jobs stepping aside over health issues, and people are gushing since the news broke.
First of all, just in terms of his...
And not just analysts or people who've made money. We're talking about consumers on the street.
Consumers on the street are worried that this is the end of their cool products, okay? Employees loved him. Apparently he engendered enormous affection and respect from Apple employees, even though reportedly he's actually quite a difficult person to get along with. He's quite demanding and can be quite brusque. Analysts obviously are looking at the effect on the stock. Market swooned when they found out that he was going to be stepping aside. And let's just be honest here. If he's stepping aside, he is not leaving the company. He is going to become chairman of the board and not CEO. He's recognized that he does, as he said, he does not have the strength or the focus anymore to lead the company. So he's still going to be there, and I suspect he's still going to be in those product meetings. No, I think it's absolutely understandable that people are worried. And frankly, even though Apple has put people in place to assure the succession, this fellow Tim Cook, who's currently chief operating officer, will become CEO, is by all accounts a brilliant manager. And there are plenty of people on the team who can work the magic. And Apple has about, by the reckoning of our tech editor, has about 3 years worth of products in the pipeline. Maybe not necessarily.
So it's
brand
what
new
happens
products.
after that'll matter.
Exactly right. We don't know whether the markets overdid the reaction, and we won't know for another 3 years.
Perhaps, Nicholas Norbrook, part of the reason for this rock star status is the fact that the guy didn't finish college, and that he didn't listen to the suits. A reporter once asked him about market surveys, and he says, "I don't do any. It's not the consumer's job to know what they want."
I think the most touching tribute was one given by a British comedian and writer called Stephen Fry, who's absolutely loves all Apple products. And he kind of channeled what Oscar Wilde used to say about objects, citing the horrific architectural catastrophes of the 1960s in England when people made office blocks. People used to go to work and spend 10 hours of their day in horrific environments. Steve Jobs understood that the computer is the average worker's environment, and it should be easy. It should be a beautiful thing. It should be nice to spend your hours around. And an operating system, like it or loathe it, you have to deal with computers every single day. If that interface is made that much more smooth, that much more easy to get around, then it's a huge boon for the whole of humanity. It might sound grandiose, but I think he understood that it was an everyday thing.
Not everybody's a fan, though, of Steve Jobs. And you had an article this Friday that said that 9 patents for inventions bear the name of Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, 12 for those of the founders of Google, 313 for Steve Jobs. On Twitter, Mark Wilmore writes, I wonder who took more of what didn't belong to them on their last day, Steve Jobs or Gaddafi. There is this idea, Dave Clark, that he was somebody perhaps who was a little too much in the limelight.
Well, I remember back when personal computers began to become common among my friends, there was this kind of idea that Apple was the plucky little outsider who brought genius to the thing, while the more stick-in-the-mud people were stuck with their PCs, or based on the IBM model, and that they were somehow the hippie organization now, but they, alongside Google, just dominate the world of tech in so many different areas. And the products are designed with that in mind. The products lock you in. You have to use the iTunes store to charge up your MP3 player. If you had a Sony Walkman back in the day, you could put cassettes of any kind you liked into it, and cassettes you recorded illegally off the radio. Whereas with your iPhone, it's designed to lock you into the Apple lifestyle from dawn till dusk. It's very hard to synchronize products across. It's just 2 buttons on my mouse.
I mean, there is a sort of fetishism about Apple, which really does kind of grate on my nerves. But I totally agree with you. Steve Jobs became a rock star because he defined something about this time and this generation, and that is that he dropped out of college, he followed his own path, he was his own man, and he was a raging success, and he's everybody's fantasy in many ways.
So how did Bill Gates not get to have the rock star status? Because, he dropped out of college and he very much went his own way.
He didn't have
do
the
too
spark.
badly.
No, he didn't have the design spark, and I think he listened to the market more than Steve Jobs did. Jobs drove the market. And by the way, to the Twitter feed about the patents, there's a line in a story, a pretty good story from the Times about the New York Times about patents. And there are a lot of people who wonder if he really deserved to be on all those patents. And a patent lawyer said, well, if you put the wrong names on a patent, if you pump it up and put too many names on, your patent's going to be invalidated. So if his name was on there, it means he was in the room and he participated.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Anne Bagger-Murray, I want to thank you. I want to thank Nicholas Norbrook, Dave Clark, and Vivian Walt, and thank you for being with us for The World This Week. Stay with us. Business is next. You're watching Volkswirtschaft.